All right. So have you heard of Work Talk on TikTok?
No,
Well, I don't have TikTok, but I saw that there's like a channel. I don't. I'm not into all that,
I
but
don't either. That is fine.
I saw that there was a channel called Work Talk that people post like funny videos about work, and it's actually turned into like something very insightful for people operations and like understanding why people are doing things at work,
Okay.
how to help with it. So I saw on there that something that's been super popular recently is bare minimum Mondays, where people are like kind of being lazy on Monday or like not as engaged as a way to, like save their energy for the rest of the week or like, be more productive for the rest of the week and not burn themselves out right away on Monday. And so they're like kind of disengaged and they call it bare minimum Mondays.
So, like, intentionally and strategically doing the bare minimum on Mondays.
Yep. It's kind of like a George
Thing.
Costanza type thing where like you may or may not be exerting more work and effort to make it look like you're working than it would be if you're just actually doing it.
Boss
Especially
horse
right now.
five.
Yeah. There was one time when I was working at an accounting firm, there was a young kid who was just hired, and he was like working at his desk, and he told me that the firm owner walked up behind him, and he got really nervous and like started to hurriedly act like he was working again, but then he realized like that he was already working, and so it was just kind of like it was like a reflex to like, you know what I mean?
That's so messed up. Oh my god. So,
But yeah, as a business owner, like I always worry, if people are engaged or not, or how people are spending their time. Which we don't have that much of an issue, but it's still something that's like on my mind. And so, what do you think like our secret is to keeping people engaged? It's probably not one particular thing, right? It's probably a myriad of things.
well,
Um,
I mean, I'm a big proponent, and I probably will get in trouble for this, but like, I'm a big proponent of like let people work how they work best, and I think that's how we keep people engaged is we make sure people are getting their shit done, And it's like if we're getting their shit done, I don't care if they're working all day Monday and half a day on Friday, or if they're purposely disengaging on Monday to save their energy for Friday. To me, if someone has to think about like not putting in a full amount of energy on a particular day each week so that they don't burn out by Friday, they're already freaking burned out. Like they're already there. So that's a problem, you know.
yeah, yeah. So it's definitely like, yeah. Once you've gotten to that point, you need to kind of take a few steps back and do a few other things that are some of the underlying causes. Like you said, like they're already burnt out. But our workplace is a little bit different because we're a little bit more flexible. But there are workplaces that can't have that flexibility, and so it's like how do you keep people engaged? Like we had a client where a lot of their staff were teachers, right? So teachers have to be like in front of a class every single day, 5 days a week. So what, like, how would you keep a role like that engaged where you have to be on, on set times?
Well, I think that's a really good question because, for example, like I recently gave a training about time management and productivity, and we talked about like how tackling things on your to-do list gives you energy, and energy to kind of flow into other things, especially throughout the day, throughout the week. So, to me, for example, um, it would be, I think a lot of companies have a swarm of meetings on Mondays. And then people are so burned out from just sitting in endless meetings all day Monday. And then the work is still piling up, the emails are piling up. That then Tuesday hits and they're already like stressed out in catch up mode. So I would make Mondays more engaging. I would have like a minimum amount of meetings. Maybe there's like, max 2 meetings, right? And maybe something is fun, you have a fun, more engaging team meeting, or you make Monday like a quiet day where people have a block of time where they can just catch up and prioritize and kind of get their minds right around the week. tackle a few things that give them energy to go into the rest of the week. I'm just spitballing. Like that's what I would
Yeah,
do.
and they don't even necessarily have to be meetings, right? They could be like
Yeah.
brainstorming sessions or like something a little bit more casual, so that people don't feel. Because a lot of times people get meeting resistance, right, and that only contributes like to the burnout. So it could be something a little bit more flexible to get people excited and engaged. But I think you're right. Like when people don't have clear priorities or like a clear understanding of their goals and what needs to be done, like it's harder to get engaged. And so on a Monday, it's like if you don't have your week planned out, or if you don't have timelines planned out, or even just be thinking about the right things, like it's hard to get started.
Yeah. I mean, you get overwhelmed. It's like analysis paralysis. Or you go right into reactive mode, right? And when you're constantly in reactive mode is when burnout happens because you're just running from fire to fire to fire, responding, responding, responding. And it's none of it is thoughtful or intentional or planful. It's just like all over the place and constant duress.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe doing something fun, even like just like a little team building activity every Monday where people just can remind each other they enjoy, hopefully, they enjoy working with the people they're working with. It's like, okay, I'm working with my friends, I'm having fun. This is fun, it can be. And they get a little energy going into the week and getting some things done instead of feeling dread.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's really important, and also like incorporating wins, into those meetings, because something that I've noticed is like Friday is usually a day when everyone's like celebrating, the wins for the week, and
Yeah,
like getting into a good mood. But like you probably don't need it as much on a Friday, right? Like people are already in a good mood on Friday. Where you really need to be reminded of the wins is from the week before, will be on Monday,
that's a good idea.
to get people like to get people focused on, all right, here's what we've already accomplished, and now here's the next step, instead of like coming to the plate, and having to be like an empty slate and not knowing where to start.
Yeah, I like that. Wins on Mondays. Maybe we can have happy hour on Mondays too.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Okay, so what else are they saying about it?
Well, I mean, obviously, like a lot of career coaches are cautioning how, that level of disengagement kind of gives a perception of laziness, and could be bad for your career. Which is kind of like a no-brainer. But I think people are being a little bit more artful about it. I think the more important thing to think about is like internally, what it's doing. Um,
Yeah,
so like your vision of you, or like what it could do, for you with your company, or what it could do for you with your career. But just thinking about like you personally, people want to be productive.
right.
Yeah. So like when you arrive on Monday and like you're having a tough time, it's probably because you don't know what to do or how to engage. And so I think I've always felt that like it's a workplace's responsibility to like cultivate that engagement and have good leaders in place that are patient, understanding, and know like how to engage people. Which from my perspective as a recruiter, all goes back to like hiring people that will engage with how your leaders are leading, and kind of align with the culture that you have and what your expectations are. That way it's easier, right? Because if you're trying to manage like 100 different personalities that all have differing understandings of how to engage them, that can be really tough, right? And I think that's where a lot of leaders get overwhelmed and just kind of give up. But if you have like a clear set on who to hire and how to hire, then it makes that step easier, right? It's still hard to cultivate engagement, but it's a little bit easier when you can have a more consistent plan based on the people that are in the organization.
Yeah, of course. That's a no-brainer. But I mean, I kind of call bullshit on the career coach's response of like, you know, it could hurt your career. To me, that's one of those like cries for help, right? If someone is that burned out or that disengaged, they're coming in with a plan of disengagement. Like that's like a self-preservation mechanism. Like I need to survive this week, I need to do less today, right? And I think what's normal is you might have days here and there, random days, right? Maybe you didn't sleep the night before where you're like, yeah, today I'm not functioning at 100. So I'm going to do what I absolutely need to do to get through the day. And then I'm going to like find little moments to take breaks to survive today, and just make sure I don't drop anything crazy. Um, but if it's like every Monday I'm having to come in and have some like self-preservation technique like that, and it's becoming something that we're now branding and putting out there, to me that's a problem. Like that's a major problem, and that is, like you said, the onus is on the organization to fix that. Like if there's going to be the random one-offs of people who literally just want to do the bare minimum, and those people are going to stand out across the board and hopefully get removed, but if a large majority of people are doing this new trend, then that tells me that the large majority of the workforce is burned out. And there needs to be a bigger discussion around like, how do we preserve our workforce? How do we get them re-engaged? How do we provide space for mental, emotional, physical well-being, right? Like more wellness and support. And what are we not doing you know, that's causing this to be a trend? Like that's it's kind of a crazy thing to be a trend. Is that just me?
Yeah, but I don't know. I definitely think it's up to the employer to cultivate engagement, but that's part of like leadership. That's like a leadership skill, and having good leaders in place. And some of those leadership skills are more around like what you don't do versus what you do, you know?
Yeah, no, I
In terms
agree.
of like cultivating engagement, a lot of it's really just like refraining from doing, all the stuff, all the bad stuff and negative stuff. And if you can do that, which is a challenge in itself. If you can do that, I mean that's like like 90% of what being a leader is. But I think that there's still a level of self responsibility though. You know what I
Of
mean?
course, always, but what's telling me big picture is like that sounds like a self-preservation mechanism. If it's becoming broad enough that it's a trend, and I would be willing to bet that like the large majority of leaders are burned out, and they're probably doing the same thing, and
Yeah.
they're ill-equipped to engage their teams. So it just becomes a whole cycle. Um,
Yep.
yeah,
But what would you tell to the like? Because I think it's also like a cultural thing. Yeah, especially if something's a trend, right? It could also be a cultural thing. And so, what would you tell to an organization that makes efforts to have a healthy culture, makes efforts to train their leaders, and makes efforts to cultivate engagement, but still has people doing this because it might be like a generational thing or a culture thing, Because they're probably frustrated, right? Like those business leaders are probably frustrated that they feel like they're investing in having a healthy place, but people they might feel like there's like an attitude or like like I was saying with self responsibility, like there's like an attitude problem, right?
yeah, but then that tells me that the culture is not what they think it is, right? Because if everyone has an attitude problem and everyone's an individual problem, then you're hiring all the wrong people, right? But what's more likely happening is that there's some disconnect there between what they think the culture is and what the culture actually is. And maybe there's a lot of great aspects of the culture, and maybe the culture also involves people not feeling comfortable speaking up when they're overwhelmed. Like maybe it's so heavily team player oriented and customer service oriented, and that's excellent. But on the back end, what ends up happening is that people feel like they have to say yes to everyone and they have to say yes to every client. And so they're running themselves ragged and burning themselves out, and they don't feel like they're able to set a boundary, which tells me that there is a miss on the element of defining culture that draws that line, right? Like, hey, we want you to go above and beyond for our clients. We want you to go above and beyond for your team members, but not at the expense of your sanity, right? So how are we also building into the culture intentionally around balance and wellness?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that makes some strong points. Um, I just always go back to like I know that there's like some generational people out there that are thinking like, who didn't have whatever burnout Mondays or bare minimum Mondays was, like the generation that went and fought in World War II and then came home and got right back to work immediately. You know what I mean? It's like so like things like I know that there's those people out there that are like wondering like what more can we do for our employees?
I mean, that's just different generation. That's also survival mechanism, right? Like they didn't have an option, and many of those people went on dealing with incredible trauma, and they were an immense generation, right? Like absolutely, could people today handle what they handled? Probably not. But, I think everything evolves in both good and bad ways. And what's evolved on the positive end is that some people are not so good at like grinning and bearing it and sucking it up and just like doing what they don't want to do, even when it's hard sometimes. Right. But I think on the positive end is that sometimes should be sometimes, not all the time. Right. There still has to be balance. We still have to be able to say what we need and take care of our well being so we can also take care of our family and ourselves. And what ends up happening is people do better work. Right. Like that's the whole point. It's like if you are running on empty, you're sputtering along. You're not being efficient. You're not being effective. You're not being terribly productive. Right. So if it's more beneficial to take the time necessary here and there to refuel, aren't you going to be a lot more effective? Statistics say yes. So I'm willing to bet on the data on that one, right? Like give people the time they need to regenerate and they'll do better. You can be a hard ass and push them all day long and say, suck it up and keep going, but you're not going to get the best out of them. So,
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's what I'm referring to. And I don't think you and I are going to agree on this. I think when people do challenging things all the time, it makes easy things easy, right? And so like, you shouldn't be doing toxic things all the time, right? But I feel like there is a value to doing challenging things all the time. And I think that there are business leaders out there that feel like that has been lost and they're wondering what to do. And so I don't think you and I will agree on that specifically, but I think what you said previously about like that there's probably a misalignment, right? And so like there are business leaders that are wondering like, what more can I do for these people? And I think you're right that it could come down to like a misalignment. It could be who you've hired, or it could be how you're managing the people that you've hired, or it could be a combination of both.
yeah.
So I think something that's really important with how you're managing the people that you're hiring is um, how you understand like what they really think. And so I know that those types of exercises are useful. And I think in a lot of instances, people try to do some kind of seminar, or they try to do some kind of retreat to like learn all that stuff. When really it should be more of like small micro actions on a day to day basis to
Yeah.
get to know how people think and interact, and then understand what your culture is and how to address it.
Well, and before we wrap, I also want to clarify like, I think we're actually more on the same page than you think with that, because I'm not saying people shouldn't be challenged. I think people do need to be challenged. And we grow, the only way we grow is from being challenged, right? But I'm more about, I think it's that black or white thinking that gets people in trouble of like either people need to be challenged and pushed or we need to go easy on people. And it's more of a in between, right? Like I can support someone while pushing them. I can support them while challenging them. It's kind of like
Mhm.
the big fight between like gentle parenting versus permissive parenting, right? Like gentle parenting doesn't mean like, oh, you don't want to do that? Okay, we don't have to. Gentle parenting means like, oh, you don't want to do that? Yeah, that's really hard. I'm so sorry you're so frustrated about that. Let me help you. We're still doing it, right? Like, like
Yeah,
how do I support you in this? I can support you while you're doing it and through your big feelings about it, but we're still doing it. So, so it's like that miss of like one is not the other. There's still like a balance. So, yeah.
yeah. No, I think you're right, and you're really good at that. You're really good at doing that for people, whereas that's something that I struggle with, and so, um, yeah, and I think that, and that's the other flip side of it. Is like there are leaders out there that want to be good leaders, but maybe are lacking the skills that don't get as much leeway. You know what I mean? Like I've always found it interesting, especially like on LinkedIn. There's a lot of criticizing leaders, right? And like I
Yeah.
left my job because of a bad boss, right? But like if you were to think about it the other way around, if a leader criticized their subordinate on things that the subordinate fell through on, that would be a completely different and crazy culture, right? Like that wouldn't be acceptable. And so I've always found it interesting. Like leadership is difficult too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of leaders, and I guess that's kind of the point of what we're talking about today. Is I think there's a lot of leaders that want to do the right thing and are struggling, and they're having these people show up on this, on bare minimum Mondays, and they're frustrated with what to do. And so, I think you had some really good ideas about aligning the culture, and had some really good ideas about those kind of micro meetings on Mondays that are more fluid and free flowing, and more like a brainstorming session to get people aligned for their priorities.
Yeah, and you too. I like team building or like, things that give you energy on Mondays. That you would normally reserve for Fridays, like the fun things, like kick it off with the fun things. It's a great
Yeah.
shift, right? We don't have to
Mm.
save the fun stuff for Fridays. It's like my husband's always saying, like, we don't have to save the gifts for birthdays and Christmas. If I want to get you a gift, I can just get you a gift. It's fine for me. Give me all the gifts all the time. It's
Yep.
fine.
I wish I could think of that many gifts to give.